John for joining us from Fort Lauderdale. Again, welcome everyone who's joined so far. Feel free to drop in the chat where you are joining us from, and we'll get started here and let folks trickle in as they come in. My name's Alexis. Hi everyone, welcome to our session on solar best practices for rural electric co-ops. We're super excited to have you joining us for this Solar Congress session, and we're really excited to have this first National Solar Congress for us this year. We're Solar United Neighbors. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a national nonprofit that helps folks to go solar, join together, and fight for their energy rights. The next few weeks as part of our National Solar Congress are a great way for solar supporters across the country to come together and participate in sessions throughout our time this week and next week as we wrap up at the end of next week. Don't miss out on the many other great sessions that we have coming up. I'll drop a link in the chat with a calendar for the rest of the sessions. And without further ado, we're going to get started. We are joined by Glenn and Liz from our policy team. So I'll turn it over to them. Thank you all again for joining us today.
Great, thanks Alexis. Just saying hello to everybody in the chat. It's great to see folks here. I see some folks that I know and folks from all over the country, which is really exciting. So welcome everyone. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here with Solar United Neighbors and be sharing our solar best practices for rural electric co-ops. So I was just going to walk through agenda, was going to do quick introductions of our team and talk about a little bit more about our theory of change that Alexis already sort of mentioned, and a little context about rural electric co-ops and what they are, and a little bit about the history, and then dig into the best practices guide and the three major goals that we sort of go through in the guide with recommended best practices and a lot of examples of co-ops that are doing those things right now that I think are really exciting. And then we'll wrap up with a couple upcoming events and some Q&A. Oh, and I see a question right now about getting a copy of the recording. I think that Alexis will make sure and follow up with everyone and share the recording and resources with everybody who registered. Great question. And it seems like a lot of you are already familiar with the chat, but we're just going to remind people to use the chat. And then if you want to talk to everybody, just make sure to make sure the box says to all panelists and attendees, so everybody will see your chat, but you can also just talk to the panelists if you want. Yeah, I think that was the main thing. You can also use the Q&A if you like. We will also try to respond to questions in the chat and the Q&A. And a number of folks have already introduced themselves, but you're welcome to continue, introducing yourself, saying where you're from in the chat. And if you want to say what co-op, if you're a member owner of an electric co-op, you could put that in there too. Or if you've been working on a campaign at a co-op, in a co-op territory, that'd be great to know as well. Just wanted to introduce folks on our team. So Alexis already introduced herself, I think. Engagement specialist on our team, has been doing a lot of work supporting our Suntober events this month, from National Solar Tour to Solar Congress. And Annie Wolf, who's not actually here, but works closely with Alexis on all of those events and lots of other things. And then Glenn, our Vice President of Policy and Advocacy, is also here, and I think will be helping answer stuff in the chat and maybe facilitating some Q&A at the end. And then I'm Liz Veazey, and I'm a solar advocacy campaigner and make up the other half of our policy team with Glenn. And yeah, I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and have, I'm excited that Solar United Neighbors is doing work around rural electric co-ops, as that was sort of the focus of my work for the last few years before I came to Sun earlier this year. And then Alexis mentioned our theory of change earlier, and how we really believe in the circular theory of helping people go solar through our solar co-ops, and we help people go solar in an easier and lower cost way and provide technical assistance and support for people. And I was gonna drop a link in the chat to our Go Solar part of our website. We support people through our co-ops. We also support people, if you're not in one of our co-op areas, you can get technical assistance and we can review proposals and provide support as well. And you can find other resources and guides there to support you in that journey of going solar. And then we bring people together through events like our Solar Congress that's happening now, virtually this year and nationally for the first time. And we do lots of other programs, happy hours, regular webinars, our National Solar Tour, getting people to connect virtually this year and tour people's solar installations and see their electric vehicle chargers and batteries. And that's all still online. And I think Alexis could put in the National Solar Tour link in the chat if you want to check out any of those sites. Some of them are pretty awesome. So we've talked about going solar and joining together, and then we mobilize people to fight for their energy rights. And that's sort of what Glenn and I do on the policy team. And this is really, where we can impact state legislators, regulators, and then particularly in the context of electric co-ops, local utility policies. And so then we keep going through the cycle and keep building our movement. And we're really excited that all of you are joining us to do that. And I guess I was going to mention that, we've connected with hundreds of electric co-op member owners across the 12 main states where we work. And I'll drop those in the chat for people if you want to look at them, but we also are connected to people across the US. Let's see. So just wanted to start off with a little context around rural electric co-ops. If people haven't heard of them before, I think most of you may have because you're here today to learn more, but so we're all on the same page. Rural electric co-ops are monopoly electric utilities, so they serve specific territories and areas, and they were created, most of them in the early 1900s, when investor-owned utilities were not willing to electrify rural areas. They said, we're not going to make money going into those areas. So in a lot of those places, rural farmers and others came together to start co-ops. I think, it's important to note that those folks were often, white landowning men, and in some places, the families of those people who started the co-op may still be in charge to this day. So important to think about that sort of history and context. And the federal government supported the development of electric co-ops with access to low-cost capital and technical assistance through the Rural Electrification Association. So you can see here that there are more than 800 distribution co-ops, and there are 63 larger generation and transmission co-ops, or G&T co-ops, that are sort of co-ops of the smaller co-ops and provide power to the smaller distribution co-ops. They serve more than 40 million people across most US states, serve a lot of persistent poverty counties, have a ton of money, more than 175 billion in assets. So these co-ops are really, overall, serve a lot of Americans and are, serve a huge amount of land area. And so you can see here the land area in the US served by electric co-ops. And you can see the colors, the different colors are different generation transmission co-ops that serve a bunch of little smaller distribution co-ops. So like the blue one that serves Colorado and some of the states around there is tri-state G&T that people may have heard of. There's been a lot going on in that territory recently around clean energy. So yeah, we'll move on to cooperative principles. So cooperatives, electric co-ops, are monopoly electric utilities, like I mentioned earlier, but instead of being owned by investors out to make a profit, they are not for profit. They're technically 501c12 organizations, and they're organized as cooperatives to serve their members. They're committed to these 7 cooperative principles, the same as other cooperatives around the world. And I'll just highlight a couple of those that I think are really important here. So I think democratic member control, education, training, and information, and concern for the community are really important. And I think there's a real range in terms of the more than 800 electric co-ops in the US. I think some of the co-ops really live up to these principles, and some really are functioning energy democracies, and others really have a long way to go. But I think sort of grounding in these principles can be helpful in trying to help co-ops live up to the principles. So I was going to give a little context about Solar United Neighbors and some of our work around rural electric cooperatives. One of the places we've done the most work is with member owners at Rappahannock Electric Co-op in Virginia, where we worked with them a few years ago to start Repower REC. REC is the initials of their co-op, Rappahannock Electric Co-op. So we worked with that group on board election campaigns, unfortunately unsuccessful board election campaigns, but I think they've helped really raise issues around transparency and good governance, better solar, more clean energy, access to broadband, and a whole range of things that the co-op could do to better serve the members. And I think that co-op is moving in that direction in some ways. They've made some new hires, so we're excited to continue to see how things go there. We've also done work like hosting a virtual candidate forum at Yampa Valley Electric in Colorado in August of this year. And we're working on research and investigating work and campaigns across a number of our other states. And so this year, since I started in March, I've worked really closely with Glenn, who's here, to develop this solar best practice for rural electric co-ops guide as a resource. And I'm not sure if anybody has posted it in the chat yet, but I can post the link there now where you can access that guide, and we will walk through, for the rest of the webinar, we'll mostly just be walking through that guide and the 3 main goals that we lay out there. First goal, encourage customer-owned rooftop solar. Second goal, broaden solar access through community solar. And the third goal, integrate more solar storage in co-op energy mix and transition to a modern grid. So that's really the focus, and we'll dig into some examples of co-ops that are doing those things. So under the first goal, and encouraging customer-owned rooftop solar, we think that one of the top pieces that really helps encourage and support that is having fair, transparent net metering policies that provide fair compensation for rooftop solar owners at the full retail rate. So when you send power back to the grid, you should be credited the same amount that you pay, because there's a lot of value to the solar you're providing, and you should be fairly compensated for that. So that's really one top key thing that co-ops can do, and many co-ops do that, and then some co-ops don't do that. So there's the whole range. In a lot of states, the co-ops don't have to follow state policy around net metering, but it really varies state to state. And some co-ops do have to follow state policy if there is one, and some don't. So a whole range of policies out there. It's really important for co-ops to recognize that there are benefits that solar customers provide to all cooperative members. So we're talking about things from environment and climate change. The co-op may or may not want to talk about that, but there are also, key benefits to their grid and peak reduction and lack of additional investment in grid infrastructure or peaking plants or other things that the co-op needs to recognize and make sure that they're crediting solar customers with providing those benefits. And co-ops can provide incentives, rebates, and on-bill financing programs, and we'll dig into some examples of that in a minute. And then they can help make it easier for people to go solar and remove any sort of arbitrary limitations and red tape and make the process easier for people to interconnect. So some specific examples of rebates. San Miguel Power Association Colorado has a $750 rebate for residential solar and a $2,500 rebate for business solar. So that's a pretty good example there. There's also a generation and transmission co-op or an association, I guess it's just a state association in Pennsylvania, but they offer a renewable energy assistance program that covers costs for interconnection and so reduces the cost to homeowners or others who are connecting their solar systems to the grid. So that's a great program as well. And then here are a few on-bill program examples. Mountain Parks Electric in Colorado, where I think we have launched, I think, a solar co-op in their territory, but they have an on-bill financing program for solar and energy efficiency called Electrify Everything that they just launched this summer. And it's a 1% to 2% interest program. So it's offering people a really good deal and helps provide that financing. Their Florida Keys Electric Co-op, I think we have worked with them and run solar co-ops in their territory, and they have offer an on-bill financing program for solar as well. Another co-op in Arkansas, Washita Electric, has an on-bill solar program. The first two are sort of, I think, are generally loan programs, and the third one at Washita, it's very wonky and complicated, but it's a pay-as-you-save model where the co-op invests in and owns the upgrades or the solar or the energy efficiency. I think their program actually does both. And then you pay them back, and then you take over ownership after you've paid it back. So it's not actually a loan or debt, which really helps increase access. So I think that's a really exciting program, and we're working on thinking about how to get more programs like that across the country right now. And then I included a really great quote from Mark Casey, Washita Electric CEO. The co-op solar and efficiency investments have reduced peak load costs by 30% over the last 4 years. And as a result, they're proposing to reduce their rates by 4.5%. And I think that quote may be a few years old, and I think they actually have reduced their rates due in some part to their on-bill solar and energy efficiency programs. So that's a pretty exciting development there in Arkansas. And then in terms of more specifics around removing limitations and red tape, I put an image, a screenshot from Pedernales Electric Co-op here. They have really transparent interconnection process, and they have all of the related materials available on their website and downloadable to make it easy and help walk people through the process. One thing co-ops can do is get rid of any sort of punitive solar charges. I think some co-ops have special charges just for people who have solar, and we think that's really unfair and unnecessary and provides, an unnecessary barrier. Co-ops can help members access data to manage their demand charges and reduce their costs if they, I guess, if they have smart meters or if they are collecting that data. Make sure that any fixed charges are fair and transparent. And so in that case, we would want them to show, you know, to do the math to show why does the fee need to be $45 a month. Show us where you're getting that from. And limits on the size of rooftop systems. Some co-ops may have limits, so we'd like to see no limits on those systems. And then timely and streamlined interconnection processes. And so I mentioned Pedernales process in Texas as an example. And there's also the International Renewable Energy Council, IREC, also has some great model interconnection procedures that we promote around the country. Glenn, I don't have a link to those handy. I don't know if you want to dig one up and put it in the chat, or I can add one later. And then moving on to goal number 3, broaden access through community solar. So support and facilitate member owners and private installers to develop their own community solar projects. So a lot of times we just see utilities develop what they call community solar, but doesn't really provide real benefits, and it's just sort of pay extra for solar. So we wouldn't really consider that real community solar. And so I think often if you can open up the market and have third-party developers, nonprofits, and others create community solar projects, that can really help increase access to better projects. And then, you know, it's important to have affordable, transparent, consumer-friendly programs if the utility is administering them, and making sure that there's access for low and middle income customers is also really important in community solar. And we also have resources around community solar on our website. And I think in the last year or so, we have a community solar guide with principles that provides more context and questions to ask when thinking about, is a community solar program a good program? And maybe Alexis or Glenn can pop one of those links in the chat if they found it. And then moving on to goal number 3, around increasing solar and storage, modernizing the grid. One thing co-ops could do is enter into long-term contracts to get access to solar and storage, and we're seeing some co-ops doing that. Some co-ops who have done that were able to do that because they renegotiated or left or bought themselves out of expensive fossil fuel contracts. So I'll talk more about some of those examples in a minute. And then, yeah, it's important, you know, for them not to just make commitments broadly to doing more solar, but saying specifically how much solar by when, and make sure that the member owners and the public are informed about how progress is going towards those goals. And then electric vehicle adoption and incentivizing that is another piece of this goal. So here's some more specific examples around solar goals and milestones at electric co-ops. So one of, I think, the most, one of the best goals that I've seen at a co-op is at Kit Carson Electric in New Mexico. Kit Carson bought themselves out of their long-term power purchase contract with Tri-State, which is one of these large generation transmission co-ops that serves Colorado, New Mexico, parts of Nebraska, and Wyoming. And Kit Carson just didn't think they had a good deal, and they are able to buy themselves out of the contract, which cost around $37 million for them, and they're projected to have $30 million of savings over, I think, a 10-year contract with a new power supplier, and they're going to be 100% daytime solar powered by 2022. So that includes some battery storage, and solar power. I think it's 35 megawatts of solar in their territory and some battery storage. So that's a pretty exciting one. Delta Montrose Electric Association is in Colorado, and they've also bought themselves out of their contract with Tri-State after years of negotiations and trying to get a rate on that. And they now have made a commitment to 40% renewable energy with 10 megawatts of local solar, and they have flexibility to generate up to 20% of local energy resources. Their old contract with Tri-State only gave them the ability to do up to 5% local energy. So they have a lot more flexibility now, and they're going to have access to a lot more renewable energy. So I think Kit Carson and Delta Montrose both got out of those contracts because they wanted to see more local renewable energy. And it seems like they're both going to be able to do that, which is pretty exciting. And they're going to be saving their members money all at the same time. Kauai Island Utility in Hawaii has committed to 70% renewable, including solar, biomass, and hydro by 2030. And then Tri-State, who, those co-ops that we were just talking about left to get more local renewable energy, has made some big commitments itself. Tri-State says it'll be 50% powered by renewable energy by 2024. And then in terms of incentivizing electric vehicle adoption, I included some specific examples that are in the guide from Cherryland Electric, which I think is in Michigan. They have an electric vehicle rebate of $2,000 and a rebate of $500 to $1,000 on EV chargers. Gunnison County Electric, which I think is in Colorado, has an up to $250 charger rebate. And Holy Cross, which is also in Colorado, has a $200 e-bike rebate, which is pretty cool. I have not seen that at any other utilities in the country, so I think that's really exciting. And they provide free electric vehicle chargers along with on-bill financing for the installation. So, I think these are some cool examples of how co-ops are really helping people access electric vehicles and reduce costs. Generally establishing accessible charging infrastructure is really important, and so co-ops can help businesses and others, set up charging infrastructure for people across their territory to make sure it's accessible. If co-ops have time of use rates, using those to help incentivize affordable off-peak charging can help increase affordability for electric vehicles. And then one co-op, Gunnison County, who I mentioned before in Colorado, started a program, I think a few years ago, with a EV loaner to help their members try out an electric vehicle. So I think that's another cool idea in terms of co-ops helping people access electric vehicles. And then that's it for my overview of our solar policy guide, but I'm excited to take questions with folks. And before I forget, I wanted to mention that this is part of our National Solar Congress, and there's a lot of other great policy sort of events in the next week or so, so people can check out solarcongress.org, which I think is already in the chat. There's a coffee chat with Glenn and I, Sun's policy team, this Friday. So if you have additional broader policy related questions, that's a good place to join us for that. We also have a session next week on net metering policies and the status of those across a number of states. So that'll be interesting if you want to dig into that. And then there's a number of other state policy sessions, and I think rural electric co-ops could be a piece of the discussion in some of the states, depending on who attends and what questions people have. I wanted to mention one other event going on tomorrow and Friday. called Co-op Power to the People, that a group called the Advancing Equity and Opportunity Collaborative, mostly focused in the Southeast US, but working with rural electric co-op member owners and other advocates on co-op reform. This event is sort of in response to the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, or NRECA, is having events this week, but sort of locked out some of these folks who were actually members or affiliate members. And the NRECA said, well, you can't even come and participate or listen in. We're blocking you out of listening to our discussion. They're, I think, considering a resolution around diversity, equity, and inclusion, along with some other things. And so this sort of co-op power to the people is a response to sort of being locked out of some of those events. But I just dropped a link in the chat to that if you want to check those out. I wanted to thank Madeline Craig Scheckman, who was an intern with us this summer and helped do some development of this presentation. And then just wanted to include our email address. But I think
Liz,
I will stop the share and open it up for questions.
Yeah, and everybody, hi, this is Glenn Brand. I'm the policy director for Solar United Neighbors. So I thought I'd help facilitate the questions, or basically pose them to Liz. There's some good questions that are coming in now. And I just want to remind everybody, you could put the questions in the Q&A function or in the chat. It doesn't really matter. But I thought a good first question to Liz was by Dorothy, from Dorothy. And it was, what was the driver for these co-ops? And I think you're talking about the best practices in general, or maybe, Dorothy, you were talking about a specific one, maybe it was setting strong clean energy goals. Was it member pressure? Was it legislation, economics, others? It's a good question.
Yeah, that is a great question. Thanks, Dorothy. I think Dorothy is from Kansas, and we've met through the REAMP network, and Dorothy has been a strong advocate for clean energy for a long time. Yeah, I think that, you know, I don't know all the details of the stories at Kit Carson and Delta Montrose, but I think some of it, you know, connects to people electing good people to the board who then pushed for these clean energy, you know, and people in those areas asking for and demanding and wanting more clean energy and more local benefits from their electric co-ops. I think it often is connected to, you know, a strong CEO who's willing to stand up for those things as well. And so I think in some cases, at some other co-ops like Ouachita that I mentioned in Arkansas, that has the really good on-bill financing program for solar and energy efficiency, that has seen the savings and been able to reduce the bills for their members. I know at that co-op that people were unhappy with the leadership, and they elected a new board who then brought in a new CEO to really sort of be more committed to members. And so that's how they sort of got that program. And they, you know, their co-op has done other things around solar and broadband access and really serving members across the board. And Roanoke Electric in North Carolina is another example of where people elected new board members to better represent their community and better serve member owners of the co-op. And then they hired a new CEO who has then brought a lot of, they have similar energy efficiency on-bill program and are doing work with solar and broadband and all kinds of things. And so I think that often it's sort of connected to members getting involved, electing new board members who then are able to lead and or bring in a new CEO to really carry out the vision and connect to members.
I might add just something that one of the reasons we put together this best practices, the solar best practices, is for people like you to advocate. So it's one thing to say we want this, we want that, but it's quite another thing to say we want to do what these other people are doing, these other co-ops are doing successfully. And so that's really one of the main reasons we did this. It wasn't just, for the academic purpose. It's really to provide a tool for advocates like yourselves to go to your rural co-op boards and say, we want to do all of these things. We want to do, or we want to tackle one at a time. So I throw that out there as hopefully a spark for your organizing. There's another question here about community solar, and it's from Philip Wright, or White, and it says, thanks, Liz. I'm curious if you have model legislation for promoting community solar at the state level. And then he says maybe that's a major topic for another session. Liz, you want to tackle that? That is a big topic, but I think community solar and rural electric cooperatives is certainly in the lane that we're in right now.
Yeah, I don't know, Glenn. I think and hey, Phil, welcome. Glad to have you here. I think Phil was a We Own It fellow and is in Alaska, so it's great. Glenn, I think you might be better suited to answer if we have any sort of model legislation. I know Solar United Neighbors has supported community solar legislation in a number of states, and it really, I think, varies state to state in terms of what is needed.
Yeah, I could say a few things about it. So we're working on in almost every state. You can't have a true community solar program unless the state passes enabling legislation. A couple of states that could do it administratively, but almost all states it has to be done by the legislature. And so then the issue is, what are the rules for the community solar program in that particular state? And that's where the policy details matter. We're working on enabling legislation for community solar, for example, in Pennsylvania right now. And so the kinds of things that we are arguing for that qualify as true community solar, not programs that are called community solar, but really just run by subscription programs run by the utility, are embodied in our guide to community solar that's referenced here in the chat. So that lays out the principles that we're of what we think is good community solar. We also are working hard in particular states to get more equitable treatment of community solar programs, that is making it broadly available to everyone and not just a select few. And I would cite the New Jersey legislation as a good model. That one has strong equity provisions. We're working on one in New Mexico, and I think it's going to be probably one of the better programs in the country. There are some famous programs that have been around for a while. Minnesota's is very highly regarded. There's a lot of community solar there, but not all of that is the kind of community solar where third parties can come together and make their own community solar projects. So I think it is a huge subject. I'd encourage everybody to take a look at our guide to community solar that's referenced in the chat. It's brand new, it's hot off the presses, so to speak. And that'll give you a good grounding to what questions to ask about what makes a community solar program true community solar. And then I think New Jersey's model, to tell you the truth, is one of the better ones. They're none of them are perfect, but that's one of the better ones right now.
Thanks, Glenn. And we had, I don't know if you saw Sally Newkirk's question that's
yes.
sort of similar. Hey, Sally, welcome. Sally is a member at Shenandoah Valley Electric Co-op in Virginia and just ran for her board and sadly did not win. But I think as others that I know have run for the boards, definitely raised some important issues. But it's asking about community solar that isn't really community solar, i.e. you're just sort of like paying extra for solar.
Yeah, Sally, I'd be curious about if you could add in the chat exactly what's your understanding of the cost of the community solar, and while you're doing that, I can just tell you, if the very first principle for community solar is that people who subscribe to it are receiving substantial, meaningful savings on their electricity bill. I mean, why? I mean, solar provides that kind of economic value, and so people should benefit from it. And so we're talking, just to give you a sense of the scale, we're talking about 20%, at least 20%. And so if the program is giving 5% savings or something like that, and you're paying a subscription fee or in some of these programs, they're still stuck in you're paying extra, which is silly, and really an abuse of the term community solar. So that's the very first piece. And so if you're saying that they're charging people, of course, some fees may be reasonable. So I don't want to overgeneralize, but it doesn't sound like that's a true community solar project.
Oh, and Glenn, I saw another question from Dorothy about how does Solar United Neighbors decide which states to work in? There's lots of exciting things happening in Kansas. That's a great question, Dorothy. I am definitely excited about Solar United Neighbors potentially expanding to other states. But Glenn, I don't know if you want to talk. I think this is more of a you question in terms of like what it takes to expand. And
well, we are a national organization, but we don't really have co-op programs in every state. And so our list of states, it's available on our website, the drop-down menus, how to go solar in your state. And it's, we started off in Washington, D.C. as a neighborhood organization and have grown remarkably to first the Mid-Atlantic, and then now we have programs in Arizona and Minnesota and Texas and Florida, and I won't go through the whole list. We are Colorado, the beginning of this year too. So basically, we're always looking for opportunities to move into more states. And some of that is just a combination of funding. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so funding is always an issue. We also look for places where people are highly motivated to go solar, and so some of our most successful programs in states where you wouldn't think of solar, West Virginia, for example, Texas, for example, even though they have a great solar resource there, they're not. There's a lot of utility scale solar, but very little rooftop solar compared to the resource potential. I'd love to come to Kansas is the shortest answer of that. I see Sally's answer there. The co-op south, I'm not sure what that means, south of us, has community solar, which you pay $5 a month. So you're paying $5 more and you get no savings? If that's the case, if I've understood this correctly, that's a premium product, and that's laughable.
Yeah, but I mean, the sad thing is there are a lot of those programs. My municipal power provider has a program where you just basically pay extra for solar. And there are a number of programs that call themselves community solar because they're like, oh, people like community solar, people want community solar, so we're going to call our program that, even though it doesn't really live up to what we would, say are the real principles that it should be living up to and providing real economic benefits to people who subscribe.
I think it's worth noting in the context of co-ops, rural co-ops, and of course, Liz talked about the history, the tradition of democracy and self-government governance in the history and the current practice, at least in the ideal form of rural co-ops. Community solar and rural co-ops should really be the best fit. You have essentially a democratic governance structure. When working well, should really support a democratic, small d, I'm talking about, democratic community solar program, which broadens the access to solar to everybody. They're not going to happen, though, without member owners like yourselves saying that you want them, and you want one that really delivers on the benefits that solar can deliver. Do folks have any other questions or comments? Always interested in comments as well. There's a question, Liz, from Richard. Sorry to join late and so forth. My local REA co-op charges $1,000 interconnection fee. I'm assuming this is for a rooftop system. Is that typical?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think this is Richard, who is working with Henry in Pennsylvania on addressing that really high interconnection fee.
Yeah.
I think, no, it's very high.
Yep.
Glenn may have a better sense, but I think that generally in the range of like up to $250 or something is sort of a reasonable interconnection fee. And Richard, you may have missed this, but I covered that the Pennsylvania Rural Electric Association even has a program that helps cover interconnection costs to try to lower those costs. And somehow it seems like your co-op is not taking advantage of that, but it sounds like you and Henry are working on that. And so I hope that Solar United Neighbors can help you all reduce that really high interconnection fee. Glenn, do you want to say anything else about interconnection fees?
No, I was going to go on to the next question about Virginia. So I think, Liz, you mentioned we've been active in the Rappahannock Rural Co-op. That's the biggest one in Virginia, by the way. It's one of the largest in the United States. And we've been working there. Liz, you might want to talk a little about that, and also some possible state legislation affecting co-ops.
Yeah, sure. It'd be great to know what co-op you are from, Tahindra, if you're from an electric co-op territory. We're connected to folks. Sally, who's here, is at Shenandoah Valley Electric Co-op and is working on getting more folks there, more engaged. She just ran for the board there. So we're connected to her. We're also connected to folks at Powell Valley Electric Co-op, which goes across the border between Tennessee and Virginia, but I think it's officially chartered in the state of Virginia. So I think those are the co-ops where I'm most connected to people, but I think Solar United Neighbors has members across other electric co-op territories across the state of Virginia. And as Glenn mentioned, we've been working for years at Rappahannock Electric Co-op, Seth Heald and Mike Murphy and a number of other folks there have been working to improve their co-op. I think they've been really struggling against proxy voting, where the board can get basically blank votes from people who don't know or don't want to vote for someone but want to like win a prize or whatever. And so they're like, well, I'll just give my proxy to the board. And so then the board takes all of these blank votes, and then at this co-op they always vote to reelect themselves. Surprise. And so that's really a struggle. So we are working with the folks at Rappahannock and Sally and others at Powell Valley and other organizations in Virginia to draft legislation that would stop and disallow things like proxy voting and just allow people to vote directly, and that's it. To really help the co-op, I would say help the co-op live up to that principle of democratic member engagement that I mentioned earlier. And we're also working on some other similar legislation around, so the Rappahannock members, I know they can't attend their board meetings. And I'm not even sure they can get notes from their board meetings these days. So how are they
This was pre-COVID, by the way, everybody.
Yeah, how are they supposed to be involved in the, democratically involved and participating in their co-op if they can't even attend or access information from their board meetings? So, other states like Colorado and South Carolina require open board meetings. So we think that's really an important piece to have to lay the groundwork for people to be more involved and get the co-ops to better serve their members. So that's another piece that we're working on. And so we're working on a couple different pieces to try to pass next year in the Virginia legislature. And on a related note, we worked with an intern this summer on a scorecard to sort of rank Virginia co-ops on a bunch of different policies. And I'll be talking more about the scorecard, and some other folks from Minnesota, Tennessee, Montana that worked on other scorecards are going to be talking about that as part of that co-op Power to the People event that I will maybe repost the link for in the chat if people want to learn more about scorecards. But hopefully that will help increase the pressure to pass the legislation and help show the need for that.
Dear Brenda, I also wanted to say that if you're interested in going solar through one of our solar co-ops, you can take a look at our website, solarunitedneighbors.org, and go to Virginia, and just in case that's what you were also getting at. Here's a question from Sequoia, I think it is. Do you have recommendations for a newly forming community-based renewable energy co-op? And then it says information on organizing. So that's intriguing. This is forming a new rural co-op, I think, is what that's focused on renewables, if I'm understanding the question right.
That is a great question. I mean, I think, you know, our organization has a lot of expertise supporting solar co-ops, which I guess technically are more like solar buying clubs, like bringing people together to get a good deal on solar together. I think we are connected to other organizations who have organized more sort of renewable energy cooperatives that are providing energy like service to people. So I think, yeah, it depends on what kind of co-op we're talking about, and where, and what sorts of things they're trying to do. If it's more of a like community solar type co-op, or something else, I think we'd be happy to provide more info. Sequoia, if you want to maybe email us at advocacy@Solar United Neighbors, and provide more information. We could potentially connect you to some other people at our organization that have more expertise, or other organizations, depending on what kind of co-op.
Let's see, there's let's see, Sequoia mentioned 2.75 megawatt production cooperatively owned. I'm assuming that's a solar project that will be sold to the utility. I think, if I understand that correctly, that's an interesting project, and that a beneficial project that either the utility can contract for that power, that is the co-op, or they could develop themselves. And that, of course, there are models for both of those. I mean, I think one thing that might be confusing, it just occurred to me, we do use the word co-op at the Solar United Neighbors in a different sense than the rural electric co-ops, and maybe we should just make that really clear. So rural electric cooperatives, of course, are the kinds of nonprofit organizations that we've been talking about, that Liz talked about their history. They are cooperatives in the sense that they are owned and operated by the members. So, you know, food co-ops or electric co-ops or whatever, that's how those things work. We do use the word for our bulk purchasing discount programs for rooftop solar. We do use the word co-ops because we think it actually reflects the approach to help people save money and to answer all their questions about solar, and provide the kind of advice and guidance people need to make that kind of decision. So sometimes it's a little confusing because we'll use our co-ops to help individuals go solar, as opposed to rural co-ops. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I tried to do that, but yeah, I think there are some examples of groups we're connected to, like Co-op Power, that does things like this, like organized community, cooperatively owned community energy. Also, think it's Cooperative Energy Futures in Minnesota, are some other examples of organizations that do similar things that might be good resources. But yeah, that sounds like a really exciting project.
Well, I'm seeing that it's just a couple of minutes before the hour, and maybe this is a good time to wrap up. Liz, did you have some final comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to thank everybody for all of the great questions and for being here. And it was great to see folks from Alaska to Florida and everywhere in between here. And yeah, I'll look forward to staying connected and continuing to get people more involved in rural electric co-op work across our states. And I hope that this Solar Best Practices Guide is a great resource. Hopefully people got the link to that and were able to access it. I think one of us can potentially post in the chat again, but we'll make sure that we'll send that out to people afterwards as well. But yeah, and hope that people can potentially attend the Coffee with Policy Team chat this Friday and other Solar Congress events.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn and Liz. I see, Richard, you're asking about it being recorded. We do have it recorded, and we'll send that out in an email afterwards so you can review it then. And we'll send out the links that were included in here as well. So if you didn't catch them before this, you're able to access them later. So thank you again, everyone, for attending and joining us for this session of the National Solar Congress. And thank you to Glenn and Liz for all of your hard work on this. And again, feel free to connect with them if you have any further questions, or we hope to see you at the coffee chat on Friday. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.